stand if you want, or sit if you don't.
I'm going to talk, I think, a bit more closely, more specifically about behaviour in public spaces, which is my main interest. And I've been looking into the government's agenda for livability and the perceived problem of disorder in the use of public spaces. Now, I think that, in a way, this recent policy initiative towards looking at the issue of meaningful and positive interactions between people in public spaces is a very positive thing. This focus on interaction between people, I think, is much more interesting and much more useful discussion than what I had been looking at, which was the Blair government's agenda since 2001 towards things called livability and respect, both of which, to my mind, really seem to indicate a very atomised society. That was cities which had two kinds of individuals, some of whom had good behaviour, some of whom had bad behaviour. And so, in a sense, in that regime, seeing and being seen, this familiar mantra, was really about a panoptic kind of city where CCTV and zero-tolerance policing were used to control bad, disorderly people who we didn't like, where the good people lived the good life, going out to enjoying cafe culture, and served as role models. So they were the ones to be seen as a way of improving our own life. And alongside that, from the urban design perspective, there was a drive towards making environments more orderly, getting rid of the perceived problem of broken windows. Now, I think what's good about interaction, this focus on interaction, is that it goes way beyond appearances. It's much more about social processes and community processes than it is about vision, making a vision for the city in a very physical, designed sense. Because this new focus, it seems to me, is about shared spaces and openness and bringing people together. And the idea, which I take from some of the work by Bannister and others, that cities should be about tolerance and not about zero tolerance. So what is public life, which is sort of the question that's been thrown to us? I think that ultimately it's about confounding expectations about how people should behave, what people should do, about testing rules, about taking risks, and through those processes about discovery and learning. And all that means using public spaces in unplanned ways other than what we as designers might have anticipated. And it's about an absence of regulation and control. And for that, I thought it was useful to quote Donald Rumsfeld, who said quite famously, "Freedom is messy." The second point I'd like to talk about briefly is the idea of this tension between the orderly, predictable, secure vision of what a city should be like, and the tension between that and the desire to make cities, make places and life better, that is, to make new social life possible. I think that's a tension that really goes right to the heart of planning, between order and disorder. Cities, I think, are dense and diverse. They're places where we're mostly surrounded by strangers. But none of that really comes to much unless there is mixing and interaction and a certain degree of unpredictability and disorder in how people use public spaces. And I think that has to happen in something that's truly public. It can't happen in third spaces like we're in now, what Oldenburg talks about with cafes, other kinds of home turfs that people have. So the important kinds of spaces, I think, to look at are in-between kinds of spaces, spaces where use, meaning, function has to be shared and negotiated. And that's why I'm interested in the book we edited, Loose Space, at this whole cycle of ways that people negotiate between planned and unplanned uses, that there is appropriation of spaces which have a defined use, that there's a tension between the different user groups, that there is a process of resistance and back and forth between different user groups, and that there is discovery of new uses for spaces. All of this means maybe not disorder, but in fact some kind of richer and more complex kind of order, which supports, in addition to that, that this growth of a more complex kind of social life partly is driven forward by getting people involved in the process of placemaking. That is, all these processes of appropriation and resistance to planned uses and planned forms requires people's active engagement. The third issue I'd like to raise is the question of how we can make spaces more useful to more people so that they are actually inclusive and attractive to users and there will be mixing and diversity. One of the issues that's, I think, problematic about design is, of course, it's much easier to prevent or regulate specific kinds of behaviours than it is to enable behaviour. And if we think about what the abbreviation SEPTED means, of course, it's about preventing certain kinds of behaviours. Design then often is used to limit risks rather than create opportunities. And of course, limiting risks in spaces also usually means limiting the opportunities that they offer. Things like fences, signs that tell us what not to do, metal lugs that are put on the edge of steps and across benches to stop people skateboarding. All of these things, what they really point out is what people would like to do, what people could otherwise do in these spaces. Alongside the design aspect of regulation, there is, of course, the persistent problem of privatising spaces and the management of spaces. So I think it's quite interesting that these recent government documents have picked up on some of Demos's suggestions about bottom-up and undesigned kinds of spaces, also the kinds of spaces we were talking about in loose space, and to focus on particular types of settings, that is, relationships between known and defined spaces and known and defined functions and activities. Transitional spaces, spaces that are wastelands where people are expected to play and so there's not a strict programming, places where people naturally congregate like entries and exits. And also another point that I think is particularly useful in Demos's work is the focus on productive spaces rather than just consumption spaces, because of course our identity is much more carried through by the things that we do rather than the things that we watch other people doing. Thank you.